Donald Trump and the other defendants have committed persistent and repeated fraud. Last week, we proved that in our motion for summary judgment. Today, we will prove our other claims. My message is simple. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how much money you think you may have, no one is above the law.
The New York Appeals Court is now throwing out the nearly $500 million judgment against President Trump in the civil fraud case brought by the state's attorney general. I want to go live now to our correspondent, Kara Scannell, in New York. So, Kara, update our viewers. What are you learning about this breaking news?
Wolf, this is a huge win for President Donald Trump. A New York appeals court 5-member panels have agreed to throw out the nearly $500 million judgment against the president. This was from the case brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James. Now, this is a 323-page opinion. The judges remarkably could not reach unanimity on any one opinion, and they note that there were profound disagreements in how they were analyzing this, but enough of them, they had agreed to this so that the case could move forward to the next stage where they expect it will be appealed further. But this decision does say that the judgment, the nearly $500 million, is thrown out.
All right, guys, so a huge breaking news victory for Trump today and a major defeat for Letitia James, MSNBC, and the many Democrats who told us for years that nobody is above the law, while, of course, they were actively violating Donald Trump's constitutional rights on the First Amendment, Eighth Amendment, and many others, as we just got the news today that a New York Court of Appeals has voided, they have thrown out the $500 million civil fraud penalty brought against Donald Trump by Letitia James back during the 2024 election cycle. And needless to say, Letitia and her friends in the liberal media are not taking this all too well today. In fact, they are engaging in some pretty hilarious cope, claiming that they won, despite the fact that, again, the $500 million penalty has been thrown out. Trump is off the hook. He doesn't have to pay any of this. They're saying, no, Trump is still bad or something. And Letitia is still pretending to be a legitimate attorney general, despite the fact that everything you're seeing clearly is showing that is not the case. So it's pretty hysterical, and we'll bring you all of that news and coverage in today's video, as well as the specific details of what brought this ridiculous case of lawfare that we all knew was rigged, we all knew was a witch hunt, but specifically why even in a Democrat state, the appeals court threw out this penalty, because it's pretty telling. It's actually an open admission that none of this stuff was legitimate. It was all just political persecution. And why is that? It has specifically to deal here with the Eighth Amendment, and we'll tell you about that. First, though, folks, as usual, before we get into today's news, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Subscribing is not only the best way to support our videos, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And let's get into this. So I'll first of all read you some of these details, and I also want to highlight and have people remember here how ridiculous and insane this case was. Because we so often say, oh, it's a witch hunt, it was political, but let's remember the specific reason why. Because I have to say, we obviously know it was biased, we know it was New York, but this is one of the most ridiculous court cases, frankly, of all time. So I'll give you the details. An appellate court has thrown out the $500 million civil fraud penalty against President Donald Trump in the case brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James. The New York Appellate Division overturned the penalty. Why? Because they ruled that the disengorgement was an excessive fine that violates the Eighth Amendment. Of course, the Eighth Amendment is the section of the Constitution that states it is, of course, illegal to impose excessive fines and punishments, basically saying that you can't have a punishment, civil or criminal, that is just completely out of bounds or unrelated or not reciprocal to the crime or civil offense that was committed. Well, in this case, there is absolutely no grounds to say that Donald Trump did anything that warranted a $500 million fine or he committed $500 million worth of damages to anyone. And that's something I want people to remember about how insane the case they brought against Trump was. Because remember, this is the whole thing that had to deal with the valuations of some of Trump's real estate, right? Letitia James tried to argue that Mar-a-Lago was worth $15 million when Trump estimated it, I think, close to $100 million, and all this stuff right back and forth. But let's remember the origin of this. Okay, first of all, right, what was going on here was that the Trump organization was working with investors. Okay, they were trying to, show financial documents to other people who were going to invest or make business deals together. And the accusation that New York State made was subjectively based on my arbitrary opinion, because I don't know where on earth she gets the idea that, for instance, Mar-a-Lago is only worth $15 million. It's literally a historic mansion, now the mansion of the president. It's ridiculous, right? But based on my subjective opinion, I think your valuations are wrong, and I think you committed business fraud in that process. But here's what's very interesting, right? So it's not the fellow investors who are bringing the case, right? Because it'd be one thing if Trump showed this kind of net worth to other investors and there's reasonable grounds to believe, oh, that was lying, and then we intentionally got into a bad business deal because you misrepresented it, and we lost all this money, and now we're suing you for the fraud. Maybe that might make sense if that was the case, but that's not what this court case was. No, instead, the state of New York, who is a third party here, they had nothing on the line, right? This is basically private business deals between two different investors. New York comes into the middle of that and says, no, Trump, you defrauded because we believe your property is worth a different number than your property is worth. It's so ridiculous because in civil court, the typical premise of why you sue people is restitution for damages, right? So you're supposed to say, hey, look, in my opinion, what you did to me, you wronged me, you frauded me, you defamed me. This caused, let's say, $1.2 million worth of damages. That's what I'm suing here for. But New York State, as a third party, not being privy to any of these business deals, had nothing on the line in this case. They were not affected by it. The investors themselves, who Trump allegedly defrauded, never said they were defrauded. They weren't involved in this. They weren't coming to the courts and saying, hey, he ripped us off, he lied to us. New York brings this out of nowhere, and then the ultimate ruling was he has to pay $500 million to New York for what? What damages worth $500 million did Donald Trump, by privately, according to them, overvaluing the property, the value of his property and assets and real estate to other private investors, how on earth did that do $500 million worth of damage to the state of New York and the New York government? Notice how it doesn't actually make any sense. As I said, it's like the most ridiculous court case ever brought and the most ridiculous penalty ever brought. So hence, by the way, that is why even in a blue state, even in a place where, I'm assuming this is not the most conservative court you're dealing with, they are saying this penalty is ridiculous. It makes no sense. And of course, it violates the 8th Amendment. Now, on the question of whether or not Trump and his company are liable at all, which at this point doesn't really matter because the punishment has been tossed out, but the 5-member panel did uphold the findings that Trump and his company were liable, affirming that James acted within her authority. But this question as well is now going to go to another superior court in New York. So this issue on whether the lawsuit was legitimate to begin with will still be decided. But hey, there's the news where it doesn't even matter either way, because again, Trump does not have to pay the $500 million. So as you can see, the ruling leaves liability intact, but eliminates the massive financial penalty of $364 million plus interest, which rises to around $500 million. Trump took to Truth Social to declare a total victory. We'll read that for you in a second. But Trump also blasted the case as election interference, saying it was tried during his 2024 campaign, while praising Justice David Friedman, who sat on this court and issued a partial dissent. As I said, the court was divided on this question of whether or not to remove all liability, basically the guilty ruling, but in the terms of civil court, right? So Friedman wrote that James's true aim was political, yes, indeed it was, and argued that the entire case should be dismissed. He said that her ultimate goal was not market hygiene, but political hygiene, ending with a derailment of Trump's political career and the destruction of his real estate business. And here's what I pointed out, right? What I said in the beginning. This is also what the dissenting judge in this case is arguing. Friedman blasted James's use of Section 6312 of New York's executive law, which gives the state attorney general broad power to pursue civil fraud claims. He wrote that it was unprecedented and political, giving James, quote, essentially limitless power to prosecute her political enemies. Well, gee, needless to say, she has been weaponizing that. But here's what he said. Friedman wrote that Trump's business deals involved sophisticated parties who profited without harming the public, as I said, right? Profited without harming the public. By the way, again, the business deals went fine. They went well. The investors made money. So how can you argue the investors were frauded when, okay, whatever you think the valuation of real estate is, which, by the way, is subjective. It depends on what the market is, who's going to buy it, auction. There's many factors. So for the state, first of all, to come in and say, I objectively believe Mar-a-Lago is worth $15 million, utterly ludicrous, okay? It's like there's a reasonable kind of bounds of estimation of all of that. But again, the fraud shouldn't even be an issue if the investors made money. Then it was not a fraud, right? What damage was done by Trump, supposedly, even according to you, misvaluing the price of his real estate? There is none, right? So as he said, business deals, sophisticated parties profited without harming the public. Certainly, there's no area on earth in which the state of New York was somehow harmed by this, and concluded that, quote, he would reverse the judgment and dismiss the complaint. He goes on here to say that, again, much like the criminal case brought in Manhattan, the New York Democrats here tried to weaponize very unprecedented levels of power and bend the law, essentially. The law that nobody's above, but they bent themselves to try to manipulate the way they could make this case. So Section 6312 has never been used in the way it is being used in this case. Yeah, gee, you don't say, because they just made this up. Same thing with the criminal case. They made it up, namely to attack successful private commercial transactions negotiated at an arm's length between highly sophisticated parties fully capable of monitoring and defending their own interests, Friedman wrote. It's worth noting as well, by the way, as other news outlets. Oh, look, nice little mortgage ad, by the way, on our screen, given the fact that Letitia James is the one arguing all this. By the way, just want to remind everyone, okay? So we currently have the criminal complaint, the FHA loans, right? She was allegedly committing mortgage fraud at the time, where she's bringing this case having to do with Donald Trump allegedly misrepresenting the value of his real estate. Well, of course, what was Letitia James doing here for decades? She was misrepresenting a 5-unit complex as a 4-unit complex, because that way it would qualify for FHA. She was claiming that a place in Virginia would be her primary residence while she was the Attorney General of New York. While she's doing all of this, she's trying to bring a real estate related case against Trump. I mean, I don't know. That alone maybe should be grounds to disbar her from all legitimate involvement in this situation. But that in mind, here we go on. So all parties to these private transactions, again, private transactions, profited handsomely from the deals, from which there was no discernible negative effect on the public interest, and again, no discernible evidence of fraud if they profited. It's also worth noting, too, that when, this is a part of the case, by the way, this was the Trump lawyer argument, when they gave those documents to investors, it clearly stated that these valuations are estimations, right? They're unaudited. That's the exact term, unaudited. So it clearly said to the investors, look, this is not an exact number. We're not saying to etch this in stone. Here's just an estimation of the net worth. The investors said, okay, sounds reasonable to me. They made the deals, they profited. New York State is still claiming fraud here. Ridiculous. But nonetheless, because the judges were split on liability, the case is now likely headed to New York's highest court, the Court of Appeals. James confirmed her intention to appeal the ruling in a statement. So she's trying to appeal even more, saying she was doing so to protect the rights and interests of New Yorkers. So guys, there you essentially have it. And yes, this all comes at the same time that the DOJ is investigating her for alleged mortgage fraud. Now, that said, I want to, first of all, we talk about the political nature of this case, whether that's Letitia James or the judge who made the original ruling on all of this. Remember some of the sights and sounds here? They're sitting around laughing. It's a big dog and pony show. Yeah, you really believe this was ever a fair case to begin with? Well, even the judges in the appellate court right now are saying, no, big surprise. But this right here was not really a very legitimate civil prosecution.
Changes now.
There we have the Attorney General, Letitia James, in the front row.
Okay, so as this starts...
Yeah, well, they're not smiling now. Remember this tweet, by the way? She puts out $464,576,230 million and 62 cents. Yeah, guess what? This did not age well because now this number is $0. Trump should tweet that out in response, right? $0.
Well, my role is civil. But I will come back before you soon with a check for $250 million. And to let you know that he is no longer allowed to do business in the state of New York. Yeah, we've got a special charge to show up and stand up for one another.
Yeah, well, that didn't age well. I think we're going to have to show up now with a check of $0. Okay. So now you see the reaction from New York Attorney General Letitia James today. Here's her statement on it. Again, complete and insane and total cope, claiming she somehow won here when even the appellate court, before it goes to the appeals, they were divided on whether or not Trump was actually liable, aka guilty, but again in civil court terms there. And they unanimously ruled here that the punishment weighed down was not just excessive and ridiculous, it violated the Constitution, it violated his constitutional rights. Here's her spin to somehow claim victory. Quote, the First Department today affirmed the well-supported finding of the trial court. Donald Trump, his company, and his two children are liable for fraud. But again, the court was divided on this. This is going up to a higher one, so maybe hold your horses there. But on that case, who even cares? He doesn't have to pay the money. The whole point was the money, okay? Don't try to sit here and tell me it was ever a legitimate court case. I mean, we know what the motive here always was, to bankrupt him, to bankrupt his family, and you failed in that regard. So anyways, the court upheld the injunctive relief that we won, limiting Donald Trump and the Trump Organization officers' ability to do business in New York. It should not be lost to history. Yet another court has ruled, that the president violated the law and that our case has merit. They also ruled that you violated the law, actually, but okay. We will seek appeal to the Court of Appeals and continue to protect the rights and interests of New Yorkers. So there you have her, claiming victory where none is obviously to be had. MSNBC is engaging right now in very similar rhetoric, despite the fact that, again, Trump doesn't have to pay any of the money. They're trying to basically say that, no, it wasn't actually a victory, because one of them is going to a higher court. Like, what?
Eric Trump calling this a total victory, but is it?
No, it's anything but. And you can predict what the spin is going to be, total exoneration, et cetera. I have had a chance to skim this opinion, certainly not read every word of the 300-page opinion. But what's really important is, even though the court found that the fine was excessive and has eliminated that under the 8th Amendment, what it said, most importantly, is that there was fraud, that the verdict was absolutely sound, that the evidence showed that the Trump Organization engaged in massive fraud, and that is not going anywhere, that finding. In addition, the court is upholding all of the injunctive relief, that is, requiring an independent monitor to make sure that this pattern of massive fraud stops, to protect the public, barring some of the Trump Organization officials from serving in corporate leadership roles. All of that stands. And so certainly it is a benefit to the Trump Organization not have to pay $500 million in a fine. What's important here is that the court upheld the finding that the Trump Organization engaged in massive fraud.
You know what that is? That's exactly like, I'm pretty sure they said, by the way, when Judge Merchan, after Trump won the election, said, okay, well, we can't really move forward with calling you a felon. We're not going to sentence you to anything. We're just going to forget the whole thing. Of them still running and saying, oh, but Donald Trump is a convicted felon because he won't have to take it to appeals court and everything is fine and it's never going to be taken up on. But the label, same thing here. It's cope. The reason you guys brought this case was, again, to try to screw over Trump. Everyone knows what it was. Okay, we kind of laid that out for you, by the way, as to why there was no legitimate ground to even bring it to begin with. And even on this liberal court, on a liberal panel, you still have dissent. It's going up to a higher court to figure out if the ruling of liability altogether should be thrown out. Okay, we'll see what happens. But all of this, you're saying that, oh, Trump didn't win today? You could say you guys were right. It's utterly ridiculous. And here is Trump expressing that very sentiment himself as he goes out and says here, quote, these were all political trials in an effort to destroy my viability as a presidential candidate before, after, and during the election. They were strongly coordinated with the Biden-Harris campaign, correct, and will go down in history as among the most corrupt cases ever brought. These two cases are even more ridiculous than the corrupt Letitia James case and will be found out to be so in the very near future. All of these judges should be ashamed of themselves for allowing them to happen. They are political hacks who did everything possible to hurt me as a candidate. This was an attack by the Biden-Harris administration on their political opponent, me. It is such an honor to have withstood it, thrived, and even become president of the United States despite the horrible things that were done to me. Correct, by the way. Correct. You want to say, oh, well, Trump didn't win here. He did. You know why? November 5th, 2024. Because that's what it was always about. And you guys failed. So there you have it. I'd like to congratulate and thank my son, Eric Trump, and all of the people in the Trump organization that fought so strongly for justice. My legal team has refused to give up against heavy odds. This is a great day for New York City and state. And he has a much longer statement here that goes on to say, total victory in fake news of Letitia James' case. I greatly respect the court, all of that stuff. The amount, including interest and penalties, was over $550 million. It was a witch hunt in a business sense, the likes of which no one has ever seen before. And again, having read the statements of Justice Friedman, and it's not just Trump rhetoric in this case. It is actually something to which the likes have not been seen before, because the law has literally never been applied in this way in New York State before, much like the criminal case again. This was a case of election interference by the city and state trying to show illegally that I did things that were wrong, when in fact everything I did was absolutely correct and even perfect. Every single dollar was thrown out, even the penalties imposed on us by the corrupt judge, one of the most overturned in history. Apparently, he's always getting overturned here because he's a terrible judge. Arthur Engoron. I wasn't given a jury, and during the course of the trial, which lasted a long time, not given one ruling in my favor by this political hack. But worse than him, if that's possible, was Letitia James, a corrupt and incompetent attorney general who only brought this case in order to hurt me politically. That is indeed true. She is a Trump deranged lunatic, and by the way, under DOJ investigation, so you know how that goes. They made me bond the outrageous sum which never happened before and which cost me millions of dollars a month. It was a vote that should never have been allowed to happen, and everyone knew. Importantly, the vote was 5-0 here. I am so honored by Justice David Friedman's great words of wisdom, which should be read by everyone. We read them for you. I would also like to thank the court for having the courage to make this decision, which was already going down as one of the worst business persecutions in the history of our country. Also true. Again, it doesn't even make sense. Imagine the precedent this sets, by the way. So let's say, you're a small business owner. You make a deal with another small business owner, or you find an investor. He gives you $1 million or something. Everything goes well. You all make money. It's a fun time, right? Everything is good. No one is distrusting of each other. And then the district attorney of the city or the attorney general of the state just comes to both of you guys after you guys made money and you're good friends and your business partners. One of you frauded the other. Please give us $500 million. As the business owner, you look at, what? The investors, what? Imagine what that would do to the operation of business, by the way. It's utterly ridiculous. And we know that to be the case. We know what this is about. It shouldn't be a mystery as to why, by the way, so many powerful businesses and rich people have tried to pack up and leave New York. A lot of Wall Street even is trying to leave New York for places like Miami. Because when you're dealing with people like this, I mean, what do you expect, right? So sadly, there are other cases against me that are equally disgraceful, including those headed up by corrupt judges like Merchan, et cetera, et cetera. You basically get the point. But basically here going on to say that these judges should not be allowed to get away with this scam. So there you have it, guys. Again, major victory for us today. And we'll see if the liability altogether gets tossed out in the highest New York court. Who knows? Because it's appointed by Democrats, obviously. But given how weak this is, who knows? We'll see. So that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.